Good morning and welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in 20 minutes or so in time for your commute. And what a day in politics.
It's a biggie, isn't it? Good morning. It's Thursday, May the 8th. I'm Sam Coates. And at 3 p.m. today, it's set to be, well, I suppose we could call it the UK's Liberation Day. I am told by a British government source that the UK is the big and highly respected country that Donald Trump has announced will do a deal with the US, a trade deal, at 3 p.m. today. Now, number 10 government officials all buttoned down, locked down at this moment, but I've had confirmation from a government source at this early hour, about 5:45 in the morning. We will hear more later today. What do I know? That it's the UK. We know that it's heads of terms of the agreement. In other words, it's not the whole thing, but you wouldn't expect that at this stage. But nevertheless, I'm told it's substantial and it will allow, they hope, government and Keir Starmer to claim that they are saving jobs. And it's a massive moment for Keir Starmer. What do you make of it?
First of all, kudos for getting confirmation of this at about 5:45 in the morning. I think any of our colleagues listening will know that that is no mean feat. Truth Social was the chosen conduit for the first tease from Donald Trump, a major trade deal with representatives of a big and highly respected country, the first of many. That was Donald Trump teasing it and then duly confirmed, at least confirmed through sources on both sides of the Atlantic. So Politico got confirmation last night from two sources close to the administration. I'm told one of around three big deals Donald Trump is intending to sign, another with Japan, most probably India next, in order to back off and to dial down on some of the adverse reaction to his tariff splurge. But of course, this is deeply significant politically for the UK, most of all for Keir Starmer. He will be able to claim whatever is in this deal when we get a bit more of those heads of agreement later, that his softly approach to Donald Trump has been vindicated. And crucially, I think at a time when he is facing a lot of unfriendly fire on his own side, that his leadership has been working in the sense of getting what he set out to do, which is a deal which he says is going to be useful, and crucially to get a deal which will power British growth. Now, how much is going to depend on what's in it, but I think politically it's a good day for Starmer, isn't it?
100%. Look, what a roller coaster we've been on in terms of the UK-US relationship. Because Keir Starmer, as we have said on this podcast, made a bet. And it was always a risky bet. And it was the opposite bet to many of his European colleagues. And that bet was to cozy up very closely to Donald Trump, the most controversial politician in the world. And there was Keir Starmer, perhaps the nice but grey politician in number 10, tying himself to the most technicolor, unpredictable figure on the global stage, come what may. And there have been some wins up to this point. I mean, number 10 was very happy with the visit to the US, to the White House by Keir Starmer earlier this year, and the warm words poured all over Keir Starmer by Donald Trump. But also there have been dips, there have been lows in this roller coaster. The tariff levels being jacked up, the harm being done to the British economy, even though we were meant to be one of the close allies. And then there's Ukraine, where Donald Trump has spun out of control and seemed to be going down a path that the UK basically opposes. But now we're back. And this is the best possible win that Keir Starmer can have in the area that he needs it most. If this trade deal is the first in the queue, which it seems to be, and by the way, we were expecting Britain to be pushed a bit further down the queue, according to reports just a couple of weeks ago. There was a Guardian front page, I think, saying that there were other countries that had leapfrogged us in terms of the priority order. If this deal is what we expect, it will allow number 10 to claim that they are saving jobs in key areas. And that is just really, really helpful at a moment where it is the economy that's the most under pressure, I think. The cost of living, prices going up, that is the biggest headache. And it also was a bit of a fillip for Rachel Reeves, who was out there with you. And I'm not saying that you don't deserve credit. I'm just not saying that you do, Anne, because you were with her. She was also there helping nudge this deal over the line with the US Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. So I think Downing Street will be hopeful that all the credit lands in all the right places just at the point where it was really quite needed.
For a moment, I thought you were going to credit me with the trade deal, which was like, I'm influenced.
Well, as I say, I'm not crediting you. I'm not crediting you.
Well, I was taking credit for something that I didn't achieve. So obviously I'll go far if I go into politics. But we still need to know, really, don't we, much more about how far any cut to the tariffs will go on cars, on steel, on those big ticket items, and any future carve out, particularly on pharmaceuticals. We've also got that a new broadside on the brunt of planned tariffs on the film industry. Well, they're going to figure. Perhaps a word of caution, because when Donald Trump and trade deals, caution is advised. We may find ourselves sort of with less of a headache, with a lot of, if you like, the shackles taken off, or less weight and burden put onto the UK economy. But it'll be interesting, won't it, whether it is of a magnitude that is actually going to help UK growth, or is it just that we don't get as punished as others? And I think that will be the argument. I think that will be what people were bound to divide about. It's certainly better to have this deal than not to have this deal. But is it just taking away extra pain that's been put on since Donald Trump went on his tariff rampage globally, or is it something that is specific and helpful to the UK? And I mean, you may have thoughts and insights on this from your sources as well, Samba. Food standards, and particularly which edible animals are included or not included, still seems to be something that is concerning, particularly Labour backbenchers, but also a lot of people who have kind of food standards is their priority.
I think that's right. Look, once you get over the political win of there being a deal and us being at the top of the queue, there's all sorts of detail that is complex and quite possibly controversial. Look, I think the big thing that we'll judge them against, the big thing that the UK wants, is to do something about those 25% tariffs on cars and steel. Those are the industries that are squealing the most. I mean, it was only 3 weeks ago that the UK stepped in Scunthorpe to save our last steel operation there at the Scunthorpe Steelworks, ensuring that steel has a market in the US, big export market for the UK. Globally, not massive in terms of volumes, but still important for our domestic industry. That's important. The car industry, Keir Starmer standing in Jaguar Land Rover about 3-4 weeks ago, making clear he'd protect that. Luxury cars going to the US, slapped with those 25% tariffs. So are those levels reduced to 0, 10% or whatever? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. The 10%, I think, that all goods have been now sort of faced going from the UK to the US. It isn't clear that the UK is going to be able to get rid of those, but we'll see. Certainly a couple of weeks ago, government sources were downplaying any possibility of doing that. So we're looking at the tariff reduction end in terms of the wins that Downing Street want. But the big question today will be, what have we given? Now, we are going to have had to make some concessions. One of the concessions that was widely talked about was some kind of reduction in the amount of tax paid by social media companies. Do the Zuckerbergs and the like get a tax break as a price of this deal? We will wait and see. Clearly, the US wants to do more exports to the UK. Now, you mentioned food. The briefing from a week or two ago was that we weren't going to lower our food standards, but we were going to extend the quotas of the amounts that the US would be able to export into the UK in certain areas. So greater competition for some domestic food providers from the US. Let's see how that shakes down as well. So I think there's a lot of detail that we bluntly, having got the fact of the deal over the line, we are yet to find out about as we we'll be sort of scratching around through most of the day. But as we saw with the Indian trade deal earlier this week, there are negatives and there are positives, and ultimately, you asked the very good question: is it going to be a big fillip for the economy? And Just to remind listeners of the conversation we had yesterday, the Indian trade deal represents an increase of 4.8 billion by 2040, which is 0.1% of GDP. Now, you might see that as a big figure. You might see that as a comparatively small figure, depending whether you're Anne or whether you're me. But I mean, the point is that trade deals don't necessarily have a transformative effect on the macroeconomy, even if they do massively boost certain sectors that sort of closer to home. But they also mean more competition in some areas for domestic industry as well. So they are complex. So let's see what the detail brings us later today.
Eagle-eared listeners might have noticed that Sam Coates and I have a bit of a difference of opinion on trade deals, or at least how we see them, maybe, because I see them, as I would say, something, a bit of a jargony word in these circles, but table stakes for future relationship building, i.e., yes, Sam, you're right. You don't get so much on paper out of that deal with India, but it glues your relations together much more. It means if the Indian economy continues to go well, which on balance is more likely to than not, you can then amp up your trade deals and your relationship, and you have all those links through students being able to come in and out, entrepreneurs going to and fro. So that's why I am, if not a crazy optimist on these matters. I don't think the small number on the deal at the beginning counts as much as Sam, who is always counting. It's almost like he was trained in the Treasury or something.
You've introduced me to a new word this week, Anne. Table stakes. I've never heard that before. What does that actually mean?
I think it comes from gambling, doesn't it? It means getting onto the table and at least getting into the game or getting into the fray with a view to better stuff coming later. And you could also say, if you're not entirely sure about something, you have a table stake in it because it could be to your benefit, but then you're not too far in if it doesn't. But that's the jargon check applied quite rigorously by my colleague.
I think Keir Starmer today will feel that he has very much got a table stake in global affairs. It's not the only win for him today on the international stage, is it, Anne?
It's not the only win for him today. I just happened to be looking at my German feed overnight and saw that Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor in Germany, has been on a trip to France. So it was looking like it was a lot of fraternizing with France and Macron. Somewhat to everyone's surprise, on the plane or on the way back, spoke to journalists heaping praise also on Keir Starmer and saying that he is very happy to see that the Prime Minister here wants more European cooperation, sees us very clearly as part of the four big countries he said should lead on European security: Germany, France, Poland, and explicitly the UK. Interesting to close listeners, Sam. He said this was not about the EU, which I took as a code for please stop Brexit whinging in Germany, but a promising sign that he said of a rapprochement. So Keir is getting a lot of friends right now. It'll be very interesting what he makes of that, and is he able to ride those two horses? He always said he could, between a European warm-up based on defense and security, and the beneficiary in some ways of the Ukraine crisis, and that big, beautiful trade deal with the US.
All those conversations that we had in the autumn about whether or not Keir Starmer was spending too much time out of the country, well, this is where you get to cash in your chips, if we're to continue with the gambling metaphor. Just one thing in the last few moments, just another person in government has just sounded a sort of slight note of caution just on the benefits of it all on the macro picture when you look at Britain's position right now. They just said, look, I don't think that we should let the White House push us into something because they need an announcement. I think what we're seeing is that we were rolled over a bit on India, and that's happening with the EU, and it might be that that's the same thing happening with the US here. I think that's a government source just reflecting the fact that we judge often trade deals simply by the politics and then the reaction by the trade bodies. But they are, I think my caution about them is that they are massive, massive beasts that rewire under the bonnet economies in certain places, and they're incredibly complicated to actually understand. They fiddle with tiny, tiny lines of products coming in and out of the country, and that is it's actually almost unpredictable at the point that you're negotiating it. Quite the impact, factory to factory, company to company, the impact that they'll have. So we plunge into these things, and they have a massive impact, but we don't quite know what they'll be. So see you in 2040.
I think that's very shrewd. The only caveat, as you can tell, because we always have to and fro on this, Sam, is what else are you going to do in a tariff-driven world? If you don't do deals and then fiddle about with the consequences or the diversions, and you're right about that. They do have consequences, and they're not always only benign ones. I am unclear what else you do, but maybe our listeners could just decide which view they warp to more.
There's probably more good news for Keir Starmer today. And this is something actually, interestingly, his team are flagging earlier in the week. You don't often get people in government going, look at the Bank of England. It's going to have good news for us later in the week. But today that's going to come because the Bank of England are going to do their interest rate decision today. It's actually going to come at 2 minutes past 12. They are delaying the interest rate decision in order to accommodate a 2-minute silence to commemorate Victory in Europe Day. At that point, we're expecting the Monetary Policy Committee to cut interest rates by 25 basis points to 4.25%. A reduction in interest rates is possibly the quickest way that the government can slightly hope that the cost of living crisis, that prices going up is eased, that mortgages get a little bit cheaper, that people have a bit more money in their pocket, that rents don't go up by quite as much. It's such an important part of the government's economic strategy to have the Bank of England lowering interest rates that even though perhaps they're being lowered slightly slower than they might have otherwise have been done, I think they'll be really, really happy if, as expected, you get this interest rate reduction later today.
I think there'll be a huge sigh of relief in Downing Street there, because also, to your point, whatever view we take of all these trade deals, they're probably not what people who are feeling the pips squeak in terms of their household budgets, and who have been punishing the government as well as the opposition in the local elections last week, are not going, yay, there's a trade deal now, I feel okay. But they will feel a bit more okay if they have mortgages or in any way need to see a rate cut to get their personal finances feeling a bit more bouncy. Now, it's interesting also that the bank looks like it is going to make quite a decisive move today, because it's been extremely gradualist on this issue of rates and very concerned about inflation. Sam, you'll have noticed that too, and that Andrew Bailey, the governor, is gradualist on pretty much everything. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee often takes a more independent view, and there are even people, I think, there who've been pushing for a larger percentage point cut. It's not something that's going to happen in one go. It's more likely that we might see another cut in June. So I have at least one source around in the bank saying, look, we could be looking at a 0.5 percentage point cut by the time we get to the summer, but more likely a quarter today. Given how cautious the bank has been about inflation, that's already a big move. And politically, yes, it's very useful to Rachel Reeves under terrific pressure as we were going into making this podcast, even on her economic vision. All of these things kind of ease it, don't they? They oil the machine for the government to say, look, a lot of things we're doing are difficult, but a lot of them are bearing fruit as well. So I think they're going to have a pretty chirpy Thursday.
Well, that sounds like a pretty chirpy Thursday after a pretty chirpy podcast. The alarm's gone off. A lot's gone off, frankly, in the last
a lot
hour.
Went off today.
But it shows you why it's quite fun doing a podcast first thing in the morning, as we get to take you all the way through the huge number of developments that take place over the night, particularly in this Donald Trump-driven world, which brings us to the end. And so we will just say thank you very much indeed for listening. We will be back on Monday for the next edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's. Have a tariff-free weekend, or at least a reduced tariff weekend, and don't spend it all at once.
I won't spend it all at once. I'm always terrifically good value, even with the tariffs. See you later.
Bye-bye.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.